Hello, Katarina. Hello, Jake.
Hi, Victoria. Sorry, I was making the topics and you cannot unmute while you.
No problem.
Do you like the topics? Because it's about AI, crime, science.
Yes, I do. I just wish that the gun didn't have to point at the brain.
Oh, that's.
But I like the topics. There's always a critic. Yeah, perfect. For once, they have topics we need.
Yep.
Such an important subject.
Yes, I agree. It's very important. I'm happy somebody is doing research about it. Oh.
Well, yeah, I have to look at this at the slides. I'm just curious if it's about the error inherent in the facial recognition situation and what is the company who makes those, who does that and is so responsible for so many people being arrested falsely. I'm gonna look it up. Palantir, that's who it is that I was thinking of. They have a huge contract with law enforcement.
Oh, thank you.
But I also know that companies have stopped using that just because of inherent error.
Yeah, thank you for looking that up. That will be a great question later. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't find it. I had to look it up in my brain. I couldn't actually locate it Googling it.
Hi everyone, we'll start in around 7 minutes. Thank you for coming. And as you can, let me share the paper actually to the chat. This research is concerned about or uses AI to analyze how biased law enforcement is in the US and show some really interesting data. And I just shared in the chat the actual article, and this really interesting slides that our guest speaker shared with us to present today. Thank you for coming.
Okay, all the sharing. Welcome, Lisa, Albert, Hector. Welcome, Cami. Nice to see everyone here. Hello, Jen. Yeah, I agree, Lisa. We're really looking forward to hearing about research in this topic, predicting crime, recognizing bias. Hopefully saving lives of innocent people who are wrongfully convicted. Ishanu, welcome to Clubhouse.
Hi, welcome. The unmute button is all the way on the bottom right. There's a little microphone button.
Yeah,
If you
got it.
press there. How are you today? Thank you for coming.
Good, good, good. How are you guys?
Good too. Thank you so much. You enjoying your summer a little bit?
Uh, I don't know. It's,
Sorry for asking that.
We appreciate honesty all the same. We're here to support.
yeah, I'm not that bothered by the cold. I spent like a lot of time in upstate New York, at Ithaca, and yeah, those places. Though it gets really cold there compared to Chicago. So yeah, and in fact, it's too hot sometimes here. So yeah, it makes not that much difference to me, at least.
Also, the heat wave was also in Chicago, or is also in Chicago. I don't know.
Yeah, but I my job doesn't require me to stand around in the sun, thankfully. So again, not that much. Doesn't change much too many things. That would be bad. Yes, it gets really hot. Yeah, it gets to like 110 degrees. Um, yeah, it gets to that. In July, it's almost always like that.
Yeah, when I first moved to the US, I was really surprised how hot it is in the US. Like, I was so ignorant when I first moved to, as a PhD student. I was really very ignorant about the US in general. Like, what you see in movies, but
Yeah.
uh,
And
because it's
it gets
cold.
really cold too, right? There's a whole range of stuff. Like Chicago gets really hot, 120 degrees, and we also have the polar vortex, which doesn't happen every year, but if it does happen, that's like that. I mean, it will. It was an experience. So they said it would be really cold. Don't go to work and stuff. And I thought, how cold can it be? Let's come on, not go to work because it's cold. And I had to park my car, cross the street, and get inside the building. It was horrible. I felt my face was kind of peeling off. It was like -50 or something. So it also gets really cold in some of these places, and sometimes it's not just the absolute temperature. It's like if the wind picks up, that's what kind of gets you. I mean, it definitely snows more in the northeast. There's no question about that.
Yeah, it's. Oh, go
Love
ahead, Victoria.
reminisce. Oh, sorry. I just want to thank you for helping us reminisce about the polar vortex. It's a great thing to think about right now.
Yeah, I was more surprised about this crazy, heat here in New York City in the summer, like the humidity. Actually, when I first moved to the US, it was Duke University, and I moved in August. was that was so crazy hot. I didn't realize how hot it was, and then even the rain didn't make it better. It made it worse actually sometimes. So, anyways, yeah, yeah. We can actually start. It's already 9. I didn't realize. Sorry. So, yeah, welcome everyone to the Science Society. And a special welcome, of course, to you, Ishanu. And I hope I'm saying your name right. Please correct me if
Yes,
I.
yes, you are. You are.
Perfect. No, well, we're still getting to your last name. To introduce you to the audience, let me give you a little bit of information about our guest speaker here today to everyone. Um, Professor Chattopadhyay, is that right? His research focuses most on algorithmic principles, analyzing large-scale data, and he is particularly interested in where minimal human intervention is desired or needed, and where also the expertise of the domain is really low. And he did his master's degrees and in two master degrees, one in engineering and one in mathematics, and his PhD in engineering from Penn State. And he did then later on his postdoctoral training in computer science and engineering um, at the Cornell University. And then later he joined the faculty at U Chicago in 2016. And the ZEET Lab has been funded by the Department of Defense, NIH, and the Alzheimer's Association. Dr. Chattopadhyay, he won the prestigious Young Faculty Award from the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, in 2020 for his work on formal methods to study cognitive dissonance and opinion dynamics. Yeah, so we are very honored to have you here today. And before we start, if it's okay with you, um, Victoria would ask you a couple of interview questions and then we go into your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina.
Yes, thank you, Katarina. Thank you, Shanu, for being here. I won't ask you how you've been enjoying your summer then, since we've already covered that. And it led us to unpleasantness. Not really. Okay, so to carry us into your discussion tonight, though, I just have a few questions to help us get to know you a bit, because it's interesting to learn about people's connections to science. So if you could reflect on your life, and if you can think of a time or the time that you started noticing that you felt a strong connection to sciences, if that's true for you.
Oh, that's yeah, that's a loaded question. So, to tell a little bit about myself, I was born
Yes.
born and grew up really in India. Actually, when Katerina was talking about the New York weather, when I first came to this country, which was about now 22 years about. Um, so I was kind of greeted by exactly the same weather which I was accustomed to back where I grew up in Calcutta, which is eastern part of India, which is the same kind of heat. We are also on the coast, so that humidity and everything. So yeah, that goes back there. Growing up, I was pretty much always interested in science. I kind of knew that that's what I would do when I grow up. I was going to be a scientist, which everyone was always making fun of, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do science. Um, and I got into, well, there's a distinction perhaps to be made between basic science, or science as we call it, and engineering. They overlap a lot, of course, but there are some differences in what is the key questions people talk about or investigate or do in those areas, like science versus engineering. So I went into engineering because that's what you do if you are in India. And if your parents have any say in what you are going to do, and if you can pass the entrances, which are um, incredibly difficult, to say the least. And so, if you can make it through that, then basically you have to go into either engineering or medicine. This is really, I mean, unless you want to kind of really well. It doesn't work. Generally, that's what you do. You get into engineering. That's what I did. Didn't quite like the standard engineering stuff, like just making stuff. Wasn't quite satisfying to me. I was always interested in doing actual more into investigating questions that we do not know the answers of, rather than taking some principles that we know and making the best out of it, making things out of it, which probably is not the best way to speak of engineering, but it's kind of on those lines. So I, when I came to this country in US for my master's PhD, I was still in engineering, and but I was working on robotics, planning algorithms, and stuff like that. And I started kind of moving away from um, engineering applications to more fundamental questions. And for me, how that happened was going from, well, we are in the engineering department. We're going to make robots that do interesting stuff. Then let's think about how to make robots or in like artificial systems do intelligent stuff. And from there, like think about the mathematical principles underlying AI. Uh, how far can they go? What are the differences between, or how do you basically make something intelligent, and what that means in general? So worrying about or thinking about those kind of questions. Moved to Cornell for my postdoc, where essentially I was still about half and half between engineering and CS, but really what I was working on was this intelligent decision making and stuff like that. And when I joined U Chicago, which was kind of interesting because my home department is medicine. So really, what the reason I got hired was to look at complex data problems in social sciences, in medicine, which typically we don't know the answers to those things, but we have lots of data about them, and it's also often not clear how to analyze the data. Like you just can't throw a standard machine learning approach to it and solve it. So you have to kind of um, think about how to think about data, right? So that's what I'm kind of interested in, like large, complex systems which have this very interesting transitions, extreme events, um, and rare events occurring in them, but are nonetheless very, very important for us, for all of us, like weather systems, extreme weather, or seismic activity, or social interactions, upheavals in financial systems. So no matter where you look, uh, you can see this kind of really complex systems with thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of variables which are interacting, producing different patterns, and has this kind of rare extreme transitions which affect human civilization at a deep level. So one of the goals that I have is to understand systems like this. How do you go about studying this kind of things? It is again not just a matter of firing up your TensorFlow machines to do it, because many of times we don't know what questions are of interest. What is it that we're supposed to do with this data? What is it that we're supposed to predict? We don't know what factors are interacting in what ways to produce some of the things that we see are of interest. So that's what I'm interested in. That's the kind of science that I do, not in one particular domain, but really thinking about how to analyze, how to make data tell its own story. And in my recent work, I have applied this, or I have kind of tried to see how to take this further in actually in many different directions. A couple of them is looking at um, predictive diagnosis in complex diseases. For example, we had a screening tool that we came up with for autism. We're doing some work on Alzheimer's, or diseases that are really uh, quite terrible, but we do not know what exactly causes them. For example, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. That's one of the papers that's going to come out soon, and also things like crime, like social interactions, which incidentally got kind of everyone got really interested in when this paper came out. So yeah, so that's kind of probably a good way of describing what I do and what are the kind of how I think about what I do.
Thank you. And I think you've also answered the question that I was going to ask you next, is if you could bring us up to your current research, and you really have, because when you're talking about studying complex systems and how they interact, and not the challenge of not knowing exactly what questions to ask, I'm curious if you have developed some kind of algorithm or a question paradigm to follow when you address new questions or
Yeah.
new. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting to think about this, right? If you don't know what is it that you're asking, how do you even answer it? I mean, that's like a that's kind of seems to be a trick question. So, if you take it, if you think about it more concretely, so we have this very sophisticated machine learning algorithms that have come up in recent years. They were around for some time, actually, but it was not really useful to have them around, even when I was in Cornell, which is not too long back. The reason was it couldn't really run them. It couldn't run them at a level, at a scale that someone could, unless you have like, I don't know, $500,000 to spend on a cluster. Um, but now things are really cheap. Computation is really cheap, so you can run all of those things really well. You can basically take a huge amounts of data, make predictors out of them. Great. But it doesn't. One of the things that people don't quite think about, unless you are very much into this, is standard machine learning tools, almost all of them, you need to know, you need to select the features. I mean, if there are machine learning people in the audience, some of them is going to have a pushback on that, but it doesn't matter how you define where you're doing a selection. There's always a selection involved. And that kind of often, at least in medicine, at least in the questions which we would like to solve in medicine, has an issue with that. And where I'm going with this is, if you don't uh, like just kind of analyzing or just using standard machine learning tools sometimes isn't enough when you're applying it to more general domains beyond where they were designed for. Like language analysis, great. Machine learning algorithms were pretty much designed for that. Or image classification, that's great too. But when you ask questions, or when you want to say that what is the future risk of a child getting diagnosed with autism, right? And if you are only looking at the information that physicians already look at and then build a machine learning model to replicate the physician's decision, then you are basically modeling the physician. You're not really modeling the disease. So if you want to know, if you can do something more where it will, one, tell you something, raise a flag before a human physician will be aware of this. That's one. That would be great. That would be great. Now, to do that, you have to understand something more about the disease than we already do. So that's kind of on the line of trying to answer questions that we have not yet thought about asking, right? So, for example, there are risk factors, and autism is just one example. If you take other examples like dementia or certain cancers, any kind of complex disease where it is not really driven by one or a few genes or few environmental factors, where it is like a huge number of unknown and uncharted factors that come together to have something like this, um, then it's not always clear that it is very clear that we do not know all the risk factors involved, or whether the risk factors interact in different ways than we think they do to modulate the future risk. So that's like, we don't know about those things. Therefore, you cannot really have features that track those. You probably won't think about that. And so if that's the input that you start with, and you come up with or use a sophisticated machine learning tool, you will kind of, and again, this is an exaggeration, but uh, you'll almost always do worse than a human physician who has been looking at the problem for the last 20 years. So can we do better? That's the question. Can we actually answer or look for or reveal information that is not yet known or obvious? So to do that, what you have to do is basically do pattern discovery, not just come up with solving classification problems. And again, this is not like a blindingly new idea. I mean, people generally in the field generally understand that there's a difference between pattern classification and pattern discovery. So, but one thing is understanding that is an important way of looking at things. Other is being able to do it. because it becomes an incredibly difficult problem. If you don't know where the features are, how do you even use it, and how do you find interactions between them? So that's kind of one of the things that we pursue in our research group. And this particular algorithm for crime prediction, recognizing bias, is really spatial application of a more general framework, which is for modeling and forecasting rare and extreme events. And we are looking into predicting extreme weather events, seismic activity, and all that. So it's like we're trying to see. It doesn't always work as well in every application. It has to do with to what degree a particular system is actually predictable. Right? If you're trying to predict the outcomes of a coin toss, then it doesn't matter how sophisticated modeling you're using, you'll not be able to do it because it's truly completely unpredictable process. But systems, actual physical systems, are not like that. There is always some predictability which might not be obvious. So, what the way we are kind of trying to approach this is coming up with or formalizing a general set of methods or algorithms that look at this kind of historical data, figure out what are the patterns that allow you to predict such events in future, and do this with making as small a set of assumptions that you can, right? So you don't want to assume the kind of models, you don't want to assume how much memory the system has, you don't want to assume how far the influence of a particular event spreads, either in time or in space. Based on that, we learn those dependencies, and we cannot learn all the dependencies that are out there. Most of the time, we will not have enough data. Even with terabytes of data, it's still not enough for many of these complex systems. So you will never have all the dependencies that exist. The position is, can we detect enough number of them and validate enough number of them, and then we put them together into this really amazingly complex models, which are not really good for human insight or human kind of interpretation directly, but actually makes pretty good predictions for in the future, and actually kind of goes towards this idea of digital twins. So now you have a system, now you have a really complex model, which is not that transparent to direct human insights, but you can push and pull at it, perturb it, tug and pull at it, and see how the system is behaving and get your sense of understanding from there, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes. So we're getting not only information about tonight's topic, but also, as you were saying, the algorithms to handle our questions. And so I would like to just completely get out of your way right now and pass you back the mic. We have your PDF pinned at the top so people can follow along if you'd like to go by that. And also, if you would like to have a Q&A following your discussion, or if you'd rather that questions help drive your discussion, that's fine too. We are here to assist you, actually to handle that. And also sometimes people will put questions in the chat, which we can let you know about. So that's, you don't have to have any of that on your mind. So just thank you to all the friends who are here and ready to listen. And Ishanu, thank you so much. And also welcome Dr. Shah. And the mic is yours.
Thank you, Victoria. So yeah, maybe we can hold the questions till the end, unless you really want to ask something. And yeah, we can absolutely have a Q&A after. And I'm going to keep it short because at least some of the points I already touched on this. So we had this paper come out on predicting crime and recognizing bias in law enforcement, and not really unexpected. It is something that people think about a lot. It affects people's lives. So it got a lot of attention, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So yeah, you can follow along the slides. They should change by themselves as I talk about it. Just give me a second. Okay, so
yeah,
so crime is
mine did.
Yeah.
If people are following, so I guess if you're following concurrent to this discussion, maybe on a second device, or this, whatever. But yeah, mine did change. Okay. Usually, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Mike, is back
Yeah.
to you.
So crime is, I mean, this is kind of a completely superfluous slide. Crime is obviously a matter of great importance, but before I saw these numbers, I didn't quite realize that homicide actually is one of the leading causes of death uh, in younger or, yeah, more or less young people. Now, so that's important. To be able to do something, anything about it, is obviously important, but it's kind of a sensitive issue, and we'll talk about that in a moment, because, well, there are a lot of ways good intentions can go wrong when you try to come up with predictive tools in this space. Now, the thing about crime is the broad patterns are actually very predictable. We know crime goes up in summer, goes down in winter, goes up during the weekends, goes down during the week. And you can also see long range patterns, as you can see on the slide. I mean, there are 1920s at high crime, 1950s at low crime, 1980s. I mean, it's almost a perfect sine wave. And we are at the top of the sine wave. So if you go by the pattern, it's not really that unexpected that we have high crime here and around the world, really. So one of the questions that came up repeatedly when I was talking to different people about this particular work is, why is this a non-trivial problem to start with? Isn't, for example, if the broad patterns are predictable, isn't that enough to predict to do what we are saying we are doing? Um, well, no. I'm coming to that in a moment. Just because you can predict the broad patterns doesn't mean you can actually predict individual events, right? The other point that comes up is, can't you just look at hotspots of crime, and that's the same thing. You just look for where there's more crime. So something like this. Without any context. There are just hotspots, just find them, and that's it. It doesn't really work. If you look at, this is an example of locations of severe property crimes and severe violent crimes in 2 weeks in April of 2017. So April 1 to April 15th in 2017. So that's 2 weeks, right? And it's not that Chicago is particularly bad. This would be typical for any city, really. We often don't realize this. Crime is still a rare event, by the way. But even then, you have really a lot of incidents. So to say that there would be homicide next week in Chicago, we can predict that without any algorithm. Yes, sure, you can. And the city might look like a dot in Google Earth, when you zoom out. It's still a big place, and the city doesn't have enough resources to act on that by just saying there will be. I mean, that's not an actionable information. Are we going to post police officers at every corner of the street? I mean, yeah, you don't want to even do that. That will not probably be counterproductive, and so it doesn't really help to say there will be some uh, crimes or events, criminal infractions happening next week. Help. There are too many events like that. Also, looking at hotspots doesn't really work and has not worked in the past. There are a lot of efforts, a lot of papers that came out on predictive policing. I feel there's always a new version of it coming out every 6 months. And the reason is, well, many of those things don't really work. Is the idea of hotspot detection is not really, that's not how crime works, right? So if you think about hotspot, it's like putting ink in water. The ink kind of diffuses out, and you think about there is an event happening somewhere, and the influence kind of diffuses out and is increasing the odds of crime in surrounding places. But that's not how crime works. If someone's house is broken into today, the odds of their house being broken into again tomorrow is probably less, not more. Same with homicides and stuff. Unless you're in a war zone of some kind, if you have a severe crime happening, it's probably maybe not. I mean, there's gang activity of some sort. Maybe increases the likelihood of the events, or in general, actually maybe reduces the likelihood of events near in space and time of past events. So you don't know. You can't make that assumption. That's the point. And what happens, and the reason why this happens is there is a social topology that wires urban spaces, right? There are bus routes, there are transportation networks, so that two locations which are physically far apart might be actually close in this social topology. So unless you actually take account of that, you really can't make good predictions or actionable predictions. And past methods, past approaches didn't quite go as far as to kind of taking those things into consideration. So now we have lots of data. There's to kind of try out all of our ideas in most of things, not just crime. And in this kind of study, we made a conscious decision of using only data from the public domain. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is we did want to make a predictive system that not only is fair, but has a perception of fairness. So Chicago PD has forayed into predictive policing multiple times, and their latest effort was to come up with a secret list of who is going to be, they think, who is predicted to be a perpetrator or a victim of gun violence. And they used an equation to basically figure out which individual should be on the list. And that was terrible. And the list was secret, by the way. So when the list was initially revealed after a legal battle, it showed about some ridiculous number, like 50% of the black population was on the list. And basically, what it was doing is it was using things like who was arrested in the past for some not like trivial thing, and their likelihood of getting in the doing a violent crime went up, right? So I don't think there was any malice as per se in doing that. But the point is that if you look at a complex system like this and you boil it down to an equation, then you will get this kind of nonsensical results, which at that point is no longer an academic result because it affects people's lives. So what can we do when we have huge amounts of data that we have accessible right now in the public domain? Chicago, for example, puts out this log of events, which kind of tells you what happened, the latitude, longitude of a particular event, what kind of crime it was, what kind of immediate response there was, whether in arrests or not. And you have this kind of data for many other cities, the 7 other cities in the US that we looked at. So what can you do with it? And we're going to talk about the different issues of even the data there. I mean, it's not, there are biases built in there which we cannot really take out. So that is that. There is that. But at least what we can do is not put in more biases, right? Maybe we can not try to make an equation saying which individuals will commit a crime. That probably is a bad idea. But we can actually see this data set as this like a snapshot or like a video, if you may, of this spatio-temporal process, a process that is kind of unfolding on cities, which has these events coming out, and try to model that. So our approach is not to predict that one individual is going to commit a crime or one individual is at a high risk. It's not about individuals at all. It's about if you take tiles on the city, small spatial tiles, say a couple of blocks across, then can we predict if there will be events, severe crimes, property crimes, assaults, homicides in those tiles sufficiently ahead in future and with sufficiently sharp uncertainty bounds so that that becomes useful and predictable and actionable, right? So that's kind of the objective, not do it at the level of individuals, but solve this as a spatio-temporal prediction problem. And so why does it work? How can you ever predict what's going to happen in future? That's one of the questions that I'm asked. I'm quite surprised that people that isn't a question, but it is. And if you think about it, if you are not familiar or exposed to modeling or science, then that might be something strange. But it should not be strange in science, right? Science is about coming up with models that tell you about things, about aspects of a system that you have not yet observed, right? Or maybe something to that extent. So that the idea is that not everything is predictable, of course. So you cannot really say with 100% accuracy what's going to happen at the intersection of two streets a week in advance. That's not going to work. Not everything is predictable. There is obviously an unpredictable dimension to it. But then also, it is incredibly difficult for things to be perfectly random, unless you're talking about a dice that you're rolling or a fair coin that you're tossing. It's incredibly difficult to be perfectly random, which means there's always some predictability built in any kind of system. And these are complex systems, which means there are lots of dependencies at different time scales, different spatial scales, and all those dependencies actually constrain the future, which means if you can understand that, if you can model that effectively, you will have a better than random uh, chances of predicting what's going to happen in the future. And that's what we do really. Find and use patterns that predict those events, and we basically have to validate that those patterns are actually predictive, right? And really, the idea behind it is quite simple. It's like when you see dark clouds in the sky, you correctly infer that it might rain in near future. And the reason why that is a correct inference because you have seen that happen many times in the past, and so that's why that prediction works. We're pretty much doing the same thing, except our patterns are more subtle, and you have to validate those things. So you have to make those connections. If it rain, it's clouds to rains, and here our patterns are more subtle. From there, what those patterns say about the future. But really, that's what we are doing. Now, applying this to crime, and I talked to Victoria about how this is really about predicting rare and extreme events in complex systems. But crime, trying to talk about crime in any kind of community or any environment, city or otherwise, has its own issues. One is that data is always kind of biased, right? You see more crimes where you see more enforcement. And diverse communities, minority communities, have always seen more policing, which means that some crimes are reported more there in the books. There's more crime there, and there's less crime perhaps in other communities, and that might be a reflection of this differential policing and biases built in the system rather than actual what's happening in the ground. So there's always that. You're never really observing the actual crimes happening. You have only access to what is reported. So that is there, definitely. There's nothing we can really hard to counter that. And we'll talk about how we try to address some of those issues. So there is that. And so what we did was to kind of try to model the systems the best we could, and try to reduce the effect of these biases. That's one. The other thing that comes out of this is that if you have a very good predictor, you can basically you can use that as like a very high fidelity simulation system and can do these experiments on it, which you won't be able to do in the real world. And that will then tell you if there's a deviation from the scenario where there's no biased response to crime versus what you see. So that's how you can actually look for enforcement biases. That's what we talk about in the study. So that's the paper, and it was kind of we were kind of surprised how much basically how much people talked about this and is continuing to talk about this. I mean, it's important, but it's kind of interesting that it's going on and on forever. And even kind of tweeting the paper to Tom Cruise, and this narrative is a bit annoying about this, which never goes away. How this is like Minority Report. I mean, it's not. We are not using precognition. We are not using this at individual level, and we definitely are not advocating that people be put in jail for crimes that they didn't commit. Right? And it doesn't work like that. Our algorithm is about places, not about people. So let's talk about what we did very briefly, and then come back again and talk about the implications. So this is a kind of example of the data that you see that we have on the slide right now. It's, as I said, event log, what happened, when it happened, what kind of crime it was, and whether it was there was an immediate arrests made on that. That arrest data is not always available for other cities, so that is kind of only available for Chicago. So that's the data. And of course, there are many different factors that we know impact crime. And it was a conscious decision, again, not to use any of those factors. And the reason was, as soon as you sit down and try to pick out that these are the factors that are implicated in crime, some of them maybe, some of them might not be. For example, say you pick a socioeconomic factor like poverty and say that we will use that as a predictive factor. Then you're basically saying that the algorithm, or you're basically guaranteeing that the algorithm will be biased towards poorer neighborhoods, will detect more crime there. So, or even if it doesn't, it will be something that will be hard to justify that there is no bias in the way you picked those initial factors. So our kind of approach to that problem was not to pick any factors. We'll just look at purely historical event data. And we would later compare it how the predictions work or how the biases work out in different socioeconomic neighborhoods, neighborhoods of different socioeconomic status, but we don't use those information in making the model. And the idea is that, well, it's just data, it's just historical data. If certain factors are driving crime differentially in different neighborhoods, then that will be imprinted in the history, and we have to just be smart in our algorithms to kind of bring out those patterns. So that's kind of the idea there. And you can see there's seasonality there. It changes over the years, changes over the months. We could have used all of that, the weather data, economic data, policy data, and there was a conscious choice of not doing that. So what we do is we break up the city into these tiny tiles of a couple of blocks across. And imagine you're sitting into one of those blocks, one of those tiles. Then you'd see a time series of events, right? You'd see maybe a crime, like a violent crime happening, a homicide happening today, and then maybe some other thing happening a couple of days later, and so on. So if you go and sit in one of those tiles, you'll see a time series of events. And there's about 3,000 tiles that we have. I'm talking about Chicago. The number of tiles changes, of course, for different cities. And that results in a bunch of really event streams, data streams of events. There's about 3,000 locations. Each tile, we kind of differentiate between property crimes and violent crimes and arrests. So about 3 different variables, about 9,000 variables, which leads to about, if you even think about pairwise interactions or model those pairwise interactions, that leads to about 40 million those kind of binary local models. And then imagine that you can have memory effects. Something happening today here in my location might affect someplace else 3 days later, 4 days later, 5 days later. We don't know how long. We don't specify that memory. So which means literally you have billions of possible these local models that you can infer. And we did that. It takes about 1 million core hours to run for each city. And we come up with these billions of these local models. And those are assembled in a network, which then basically makes future predictions. So it's a really, really complex model. It's not something that you can look at and understand what the underlying connections are. Well, machines can, humans cannot. But that's fine, because what we are going for with this is to come up with this digital twin, first a good predictor, and then a digital twin which you can run experiments on, right? You can say if the crime rate goes up here or crime rate goes down there, what would be the effect of immediate crime? What would be the effect on law enforcement, and so on and so forth. So here's, and of course, as I said, it's a good predictor. So you can actually do something like a crime forecast. So in this one, you see the clouds. The green clouds are the risk maps, and you can update that daily. And the black dots are when the events actually happened. And these predictions can be made for, again, changes from one city to the next. For Chicago, you can make these predictions about a week in advance on about a couple of blocks. The styles are about the size of a couple of blocks. And there's a plus minus 1 day of uncertainty, right? And you can see how that works out. Works out pretty well, actually. Those are the changing real time, and you can see here the dates changing. And again, the predictions are made a week in advance, and the red dots are the actual events, right? The training was done for this particular example. The training was done on the data from about 2014, 15, 16 for 3 years, and we are making testing the model out of sample data in 2017, right? So kind of to give you a broad idea of how precise the models are. So suppose you have 10 actual crimes in a particular location, and on average, there'll be 11 predictions, out of which 8 would be correct, 2 would be missed, there'll be 2 events which would be missed, and there'll be 3 false alarms. That's for Chicago. That's what the numbers kind of work out to be, that they have 93% accuracy, 87% AUC, about 70% specificity, and about 80% sensitivity. So that's what the numbers kind of work out to be. And since you can do this about a week in advance, they're actually pretty actionable. So once we had this kind of a digital twin, we wanted to see what can we do with it. We had no intention of really just making a predictive policing tool. So the idea always was to see how we can understand better social theory on this, or how do we change policy by doing this. So one of the things we did was to run these experiments on changing crime rates in different parts of our city in Chicago, and we also did it for other cities as well after that. What we found was very interesting. We found that what we found was as crime increases, uh, generally in higher SES neighborhoods, the arrest rate kind of tracks that. So crime increases by 10%, arrest rate goes up by 10%. But at the same time, in regions which are of lower SES neighborhood status, actually the crime rate kind of crashes. So our hypothesis was that resources have been pulled away to kind of give the services as required in higher SES neighborhoods, and their not so fortunate neighbors kind of suffer from lack of resources. And we actually tested that, not only with our predictions directly, but not just in Chicago, in other cities, we see this very similar effects. And also, we did this in natural experiments, which means we looked at, without using the model, can we see a signature like that? And we see that, as you can see here, the crime changes a lot from summer to winter. Crime rates kind of go up in summer, and they go up right more or less comparably in rich and poor neighborhoods. But the change, not the absolute enforcement, but the change in enforcement is actually quite tells a different picture. Works very differently in poor neighborhoods versus in wealthier neighborhoods when the crime changes, right? When things go up, and when you stress the system, the resources are more optimally used by higher SES and wealthier neighborhoods, and essentially not so optimally, quite suboptimally, and you can see like a indication of lack of resources in poorer neighborhoods. So the idea really, and I'm going to sum up here. Idea really is to, when you have a complex system like this, how do you model that? How do you leverage the data effectively? So my approach is to kind of think about this as making a digital twin. And we talked about that a little bit before as well. So you have this huge data set. We are not trying to answer specific questions when we are starting to model it. Our objective is to come up with essentially a model of the whole system in our machine. Once you have that, why do we do that? Why do we not just answer specific questions to begin with? Because well, you don't always know what the questions are. You don't know what factors are actually responsible and what factors are not. In case of crime prediction, you also need to have it's almost necessary to have like a perception of fairness as much as it needs to be actually fair. So all of that is there. So if you model the whole system, then you can actually do these experiments. You can actually tug and pull at it and perturb it and actually get insights about the system, which you will not be able to do if you just answer individual questions. So that's kind of the idea. So of course, I'll kind of end with this, the problem of free will, right? So this is a question that's also asked many times when I talk about this work. So how can you ever predict what someone is going to do? The problem of free will, if you may. And well, the first thing is we are not predicting individual actions. That's the first thing. That seems to be a cop out though, because if we say that we can predict 7 days in future what's going to happen in a narrow enough region with a narrow enough boundary within times, like about plus minus 1 day, a couple of blocks, 7 days in the future, then are you not saying that you are predicting that someone, maybe not telling me who is the perpetrator, but someone is going to come and kill someone or do a severe property crime? And so what happens to the free will if you can actually predict that? And that's an interesting question to ask. But you have to remember, or you have to ask yourself, what sounds more disturbing? The fact that when a murder happens, someone just woke up in the morning and just decided, I'm going to go and kill someone. Or that happens, all the murders, all the homicides, all the assaults that happen are just was decided a moment before that actually happened. All of this is random. Is that more disturbing, or is it less disturbing than the idea that yes, to some extent, our actions are predictable because we are embedded in a society, our actions are predictable to some extent because we're interacting with other people and because of our situations around us, our society, our inputs, our interactions. That kind of constrains to some degree, not entirely, to some degree, what we are going to do in future, right? In some sense, when people talk about personalities of different people, that's what you were saying, right? That to some extent, what
कोई
someone's
काहे
actions could be.
नैन लड़ाए मेरे से
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That
That
was
was
that was
just
a good song.
somebody interrupting. Sorry.
Uh, so that's yeah. I'll end there. If you have questions, you can ask.
I'm really sorry that the end it was my mistake. I brought the person up because they raised their hand and yeah. Thank you so much for this really amazing presentation. And it's really all those questions are really, something that come to one's mind when we think about this type of work. Mm, I wanted to ask a question. We had the previous guest speaker here from Japan where they tried to predict weather more accurately, and if they could kind of find different nodes using basically the butterfly effect model, if they could find specific factors that would be important to basically manipulate the weather in a way that, for example, would maybe make storms less severe. So their theory is they are trying to also do this artificial um, double, or the artificial clone, and then try in the future to see if they could find some specific factors that are easy to manipulate but would kind of have a bigger scale effect. Do you think that is something that you will also in the future be able to do with your model and find, data driven, maybe some factors that we could do to downregulate crime? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. We are still looking into it. In fact, we did not. It was kind of a lot of thinking went into it, into what we report in the study and how we talk about it. Um, so there are interesting interactions between one kind of popular slash unpopular, depending on who you talk about it, is interaction between property crimes and violent crimes, right? So there was this quite famous approach to crime deterrence in New York City. It was tried in New York City first and then in other places in the late 90s, called the broken window policy. The idea was you essentially penalize people non-trivially for trivial crimes, and that brings down the crime rate. And it was justified by the idea that crime was going down. But then crime was going down globally in all cities everywhere in the world in the time. We don't quite understand why. There are theories about it. So yeah. So, but there, what we found are there are definitely interactions between property crimes and violent crimes. Not always in the manner that the broken window policy suggested, but there are interactions. So it might be actually possible to have subtle changes in enforcement policies. Doesn't involve going and putting people in jail for jaywalking, but there are other subtle things you can do. Community outreach, or somehow so it is easier to kind of manipulate rates of property crimes. It is kind of harder to manipulate the rates of violent crimes. But if they are interacting with each other, those two kinds of variables, then maybe we can have policies that regulate or do a better job of making people not commit property crimes that might change the rates of violent crimes. Sometimes we found that actually the interaction is the other way. If you try to bring down the property crimes too much, then violent crimes go up. So that might some really strange interaction might be going on there, where you prosecute property crimes less, and that might reduce violent crimes somewhat. So all this kind of these are I'm just thinking aloud to some extent. So there are a lot of these interactions that are there, which can be actually used to optimize policy choices and policy decisions.
That's a very interesting. We also had recently a aggression, like a neuroscientist that studies aggression. Um, and I was thinking, since in the summer the crime goes up, and heat is kind of also a factor. If you can protect yourself from severe heat to drive up aggression, having maybe parks and some water
Right,
fountains,
right. So it's
simple
very
things.
interesting is what's really interesting is if you ask people, tell people this, that crime goes up in winter, goes up in summer and less in winter. I think the immediate reaction would be, oh, it's too cold, so the no one is out. The person, the perpetrators or the victims, none of them is out. So that's why there's no opportunity goes down, and so crime kind of goes down. So we had a kind of very like COVID, of all the things that it had caused killing millions of people, there has been some interesting scientific opportunities because of this global pandemic, right? One of them was to test this hypothesis. So in COVID, everyone was inside pretty much, much more than they would be in winter. So did crime go down during the last 2 years? And the answer is no, it didn't. Number of patients showing up for emergencies went down. Number of kids showing up for things that happen to kids, like falling down, accidents happening at home or in the playground, that went down. Number of diagnoses of complex diseases like cancer went down, which is interesting. Did people stop having cancer? All that happened, but the number of people getting shot didn't go down in Chicago. Number of actually crimes rates almost were negligibly changed because of this. So that's kind of very interesting. This is something that we need to look at more and understand this, and it's kind of important problem to look at these things.
I mean, you have a right to have heat in the winter, but so far I don't think in every city you have the right to have AC
Right.
in summer, and everything that adds to stress that's there probably anyways, like, getting food for the family, having enough money. Every other stressor that comes on top will just, explode. Make, the it's the last drop to make somebody desperate, maybe. That was my thought, but I would like to also give other people the opportunity to speak. Dr. Shah, Dennis, Hillary, thank you for coming, and go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ishana, for a wonderful, research that you shared with us. I was just curious to ask you about the authenticity of the data because we know that with the machine learning, always there is a lots of algorithms that they just try to find the best data, and this is matter really. And also in the future, if you want to just join, somehow we can say merge the data between two different sets, like a psychological problems, how it might be possible. Did you think about that?
Yeah. So the first question is yes, of course you can you can manipulate data, but what we did was a couple of things. One is we used only public data. The software, the code is really is on GitHub, so it's open. Um, it's not in the public domain in the sense that it still requires a license if you want to use it, and there's a reason for that. We don't want it to be entirely out of our control. We don't want it to be a tool just for like any other. If I put it in the public domain, I would have no control over it. But you can look at the code, you can run it on the data yourself, and so it was not, there was no selection made, right? So for example, the prediction examples that I showed for Chicago 2017, it used the entire data for last 3 years from 2015, 14, 15, 16, and then looked at what you can do out of sample in 2017. So there was no picking and choosing. It is what it is, right? And that same thing we applied for every other city that we analyzed. Now, for the second question, can we merge it with other data sets? So yes, absolutely. We can definitely merge with things like weather. You can do that, or economic things, or all of that is fine. When you talk about merging it with psychiatric evaluations of people, you see that's what this approach at least can it be done in general in machine learning tools and modeling? Yes, can be done. For the approach that we are talking about, slightly problematic. Because the idea was not to talk about individuals. We do not want to predict which individual is going to commit a crime. If because that has never worked out in the past. That will not have perception of fairness. Even if what someone thinks that they have no bias, there might be implicit stuff going on. If you're picking and choosing what you are putting in the algorithm, then maybe that choice itself was biased in a manner that you might not even know. So our solution, at least, might not be the best solution, but that's we thought it was a good idea, was to not pick and choose any features, which means not look at individual features, not make individual predictions, and not even try to say these are the factors that drive crime, even if those are completely innocuous and we know that they drive crime. There are hundreds of publications on it. Even then, we said, let's not do that.
So by considering all of your, explanation, if that's the case, you think that specificity and sensitivity, how it might change?
It's a case on what, like doing individuals. So currently, this framework doesn't allow you to do
Now,
that.
for
You
example,
can't.
using
There is no
something
individuals
like
there.
average multiple models for merging the data, and we have a new specificity and sensitivity. And I was just wondering, maybe you have some thoughts around that.
It will be definitely better. So suppose instead of this data, instead of looking at historical crime data, if you do some kind of modeling, use the same algorithm. Again, remember, it's just one application of a general framework for predicting rare and extreme events. So if you could look at data streams in social media, what people are discussing, somehow quantize, look for keywords in the discussions, and essentially make them into time series data and model those, then maybe we can get to something like where we can incorporate psychiatric data of individuals. But we don't probably want to go in that direction. That would be like running, literally running, not quite like literal. It would be like literally running surveillance on large swaths of the population, which I do not agree with, and I don't think it will have the kind of result that you might be looking for there.
Yeah, thank you for your answers. Denise, Hillary, do you have questions?
Oh, so very many, so many, but I'll try to narrow it down to one or two. So I was last year around this time. Well, I guess it was September, end of September. I was a victim of a carjacking, a violent carjacking, and I also lost my brother when I was 16 to violent crime. He was shot back in New Orleans, where I grew up. I'm in Houston now, and the uptick in violent crime that I cannot help but notice, and not because I think I'm predispositioned to be more aware of it or not, but it's gotten to the point where you can't not notice it here and well all over the world, but most, like for me, we're just from Houston, Texas. It's just gotten every single day without fail. About 6 in the morning, I'll go look over, what the news of the day is, and overnight there's been murders. There has not been a single day since the start of this year where we have not had somebody violently murdered here in Houston. And I just don't understand why. Like, what happened? I don't know if it's a psychological thing, if it's we're going through a recession, but what can I do? Like, I mean, how can I want to be able to go walk my dog after dark, and it's not even after dark. I mean, it's literally like midday. People are getting shot at a gas station just for their car, for their Cadillac converter or whatever. What can I do? How can I be safe without having to move to another city? And even if I move to another city, what does the future of crime right now look like? Is it safe anywhere? Is there anything I can do to protect my child and my own life with both sides of staying in the house? And even that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about your loss and the fact that he was carjacked. I haven't had a personal loss like this, but my wife's car was stolen the second day she came in Chicago
Oh my
from
God.
Boston. It was like a 10-year-old Camry. I don't know why anyone would steal that. It was literally, we were thinking of dumping the car and it was stolen and whatever. So yeah, I don't know. And yes, definitely crime is up. There's no question about that. There's no sugarcoating that. Crime is definitely up. How do you protect yourself? I don't know. I mean, our algorithms, I am not probably the right person to answer that. I personally moved
I
out
guess more
of
what I was
Chicago.
asking, then that was kind of stupid for you to say that, because obviously if anybody had that answer, the whole world would know right now. But if I move to another city, will it matter at all, or is this just something globally that's just going to keep happening, or is it going to
Moving out of the city is a good
plateau?
idea. Moving out of the city is a good idea if you can afford that. If your job or if your life situation admits that, allows you for that. I moved out of Chicago. I mean, I used to stay in Hyde Park, which is a 2-minute walk to my office, and I moved to. I opted for a 35-minute drive one way each way, and the reason was there were gunshots in my hallway in my 19th floor apartment, and things look like, when you look at it that closely, there's nothing you can do. Like, what can you do as an individual? Really nothing. It has to change at the policy level. It has to change the way community engagement works. There are things that people can do. People means the people who are at the helm of the cities to make decisions, and that is not just putting people in jail. That doesn't always work. That makes things worse. But there's stuff that can be done, and sometimes it's just not done. People don't do the right things, and yeah, at an individual, if you ask me personally, apart from the algorithm, I would just move out of the city, which is what I did. I have a 5-year-old, and I was definitely not going to stay in an apartment where there's gunshots outside my door in the hallway. So yeah, but then if you move out, of course, I can't move to like 2 hours away. I still have to go to work, which means that you're right outside Chicago. So now you have in a house, and then you have to think about worry about break-ins and stuff. So yeah, that's why I think this is an important problem to look at and to think about how we can use this kind of tools to hopefully make things better, towards better, at least.
How can I assist in any possible way or use any kind of influence to progress something like this going towards making change? I mean, is there anyone I can write to, anything I can donate to, any time I can spend helping in any level at all? Just, I feel helpless because I feel like I'm not doing anything. And I'm a community driven type person. I feel like there's more I can do or should do. I just don't know what it is.
I'm I'm not the right person to ask this. I understand you. I have the same questions. But it's hard to answer that, what you can do at an individual level. Clearly, of course, we can raise awareness. We can see there's some stuff apart from predictive algorithms that we run on clusters. There are some things that people know that bring down crime, right? So if your neighborhood looks good, if your neighborhood is not full, it's clean. If you make it more green, if you have more lights out there, it's not just talking about like gentrification. It's not talking about like putting just money in it. It's just simple things like, is there more streetlights? Are there? Does it look like not unkept? That kind of changes behavior for understandable reasons, but also kind of strange if you don't understand like humans well. But that changes behavior. That changes crime rates. So that is something that we can all do as a community, I guess. Uh, but really the drive has to come from people who are making the decisions.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, Hillary, vote and help register people to vote and vote down ballot, and be aware of who is in the area that you live in is running for absolutely every office, all the way including school board, your sheriff, anyone that you can vote for. Learn about their platform, what they stand for, and really voting is a huge thing that you can do.
Yes, that
Awesome.
too.
I'll follow
I
you
didn't want to
because
talk. I
that's
didn't want to talk about voting, but yes, that's really like, this is supposed to be a democratic country, so we should be able to pick and choose who actually represents our interests rather than just doing politics, right?
Yeah, because our lives are politicized, healthcare is politicized, so we don't all have the luxury of, of saying that we're outside of any politically, um, of any sphere, of any, I'm trying to think of the word, politically influenced subject. It influences and controls all our lives. So yeah, vote, vote, vote.
I followed you. Whenever voting whatnot comes up, if you know of any place, anybody looking for volunteers, any services like that, hit me up, let me know, and I will definitely give my time.
Sure, I'll put a link in the chat because you can follow. You can come to follow the club after we vote, and also go to when we all vote. And there's a lot of information about helping registering people to vote. Thank you so much, Hillary.
Um, Dennis, you had the question, but before we go there, I wanted to point out, because there were questions in the chat and also comments to it. Psychiatric illnesses and crime is not, it's often conflated, and it's not actually data driven that people with psychiatric disorders are more violent or induce more crime or commit more crime. It's actually the opposite. A large body of data suggests, and I'm citing from a pretty good article, it's the other way around. Usually, people with mental illnesses are more likely to be victims of violent crimes than being the perpetrator. So, and this bias is also in the criminal justice, where people with mental illness get treated as criminals, and so on. So it's a big problem, and I don't want this bias to be supported here in this club. So I just wanted to add that comment, and thank you for all the comments in general. Dennis, if you have a question, please go ahead.
Thanks, Katerina. Thank you, Doctor, for this really interesting paper and talk. I was looking through the slides earlier. I would have been really excited to see a longer time frame for observation, given that Chicago has had migrations in terms of where people were situated, what the income levels were like over historical time. I just can't help but wonder. There are low crime neighborhoods in every city, including Chicago, or lower crime neighborhoods comparatively, and it just appears to me that there's a pretty high correlation, and especially if we're talking about violent crime or property type crimes, when we're discussing different types of crimes, as Eric raised about domestic violence and things, the metrics sort of, I think the outcomes change a little bit. Perhaps, that's not part of this paper, but perhaps you could speak to it. But I just can't help but notice that the places where people have resources, they have to be less violent. That doesn't mean that if you have less resources that you should be violent necessarily, but I think there's a pretty high correlation there. Would you agree? More resource availability equals less need for violent crime, or less incidents at least.
Yeah, so every city, as you said, as you pointed out correctly, cities have neighborhoods where you can see quite robustly identify regions of high crimes, low crimes. So the crime rates are very predictable. It doesn't matter where you look, what time period you look, they're pretty predictable. So that doesn't help you in predicting stuff, though. So in Chicago, for example, the South Side, the West Side has higher crime, and that's not a controversial statement, because you can just you just take the data in the public domain and do an average, and you can see that. The question really is a few questions, right? One is why that happens. We don't try to answer the why questions. In general, in science, why questions are problematic, but that's a whole different segue. The other point is, even if you can say that there's more crime, that the crime rates are higher, doesn't let you predict anything. Saying that there will be, there's expected to be like 5 homicides this weekend in the South Side, probably that is true. But what do you do? South Side is a big place. You can't. The city doesn't have enough resources, and even if they had, do you want like a 1984-esque kind of implementation? We don't want that. That is not going to end up well in the long run. So that we can't do that. So we need more precise predictions. Is crime more in places which have less resources? Yes. That's one of the main challenges in doing any kind of predictive work in this space, right? Because there's so many confounders. Poverty, lower SES status, less resources, all of this correlate very strongly with crime. Doesn't mean people who are poor, just because someone is poor, they are criminals. Of course, that's not true, and that'd be ridiculous. So But there's a correlation. These are all confounding variables, and it is extremely difficult to separate this out and figure out what is actually a real signal and what isn't. So that is there. About the question on if you have different kinds of crime. So we only looked at severe crimes. We only looked at murders, homicides, like the same thing, severe assaults, severe property crimes. And the reason is different communities have different um, degrees of trust they put in law enforcement. So not all crimes are reported, obviously, that is true everywhere. But the differential in the rate of reporting, again, correlates with the SES status of neighborhoods. So people are less likely to call 911 if they're in a minority neighborhood, or if it's really what that means. The reviewers kind of called us out on that. We kept saying minority neighborhoods because if it, basically it means Hispanic and Black neighborhoods in Chicago, at least. They are essentially the same thing here, and so poorer neighborhoods. So the differential rates of reporting, which means if we talk about domestic violence, if we talk about traffic stops, if we talk about petty crimes, drug crimes, then there's this huge differential, which will, even if you can show that you're predicting it well, you are just predicting it on top of this bias. So we wanted to see how well it does if you just look at, say, homicides, or if you just look at things which are more likely to be reported and not be which are less likely to be not reported, right? I'm sure there are some homicides which are not reported, but I doubt if there are hundreds of murders in the U.S. right now which are just not reported. I sincerely hope that's not the case. So that was the reason why we focused on just severe crimes to kind of mitigate these biases. But it'd be interesting to see what happens if you do with some other things which have a very strong reporting bias, like domestic violence, for example.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That's really interesting. I read an article recently about a woman that worked I forgot right now the name, what it is for, but to protect basically children and basically assess if the family is safe, and then assess if they need to go into foster care and so on. And she got very disappointed with the system because she said that I think in something like 50% of children of poor neighborhoods at some point are assessed by these institutions, and a little bit less than that at some point in some foster care, and so, or the parents are in trouble. And there were like very like horrific examples how yeah, children got taken away from very you know, very regular occurrences, just because of their race and where they were located. Like when mother, they were having a party in the park, and the toddler ran away for a second, and she ran right after, and then this person, this white woman came and called the police and said she doesn't know how to take care of her kids, and then she got actually arrested by the police. And so anyways, yeah, I agree that that type of, other type of data would be very biased data sets, which is quite sad. So yeah, I agree that probably a data set is quite unbiased in the form of reporting. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And I see Eric, you joined the stage. Hi.
Yeah, hi. I just had a quick question about so for example, here in Canada, I think problem with the police kind of discriminating against people of color. Similarly, what happens in the US.
I think you're cutting out for me,
Kind of
but I'm not sure if
system.
that's
Sorry, to what extent does this kind of system reinforce biases so as to make police engagements more dangerous, and how could we offset it, or to what extent does the responsibility of a person who designs such a system extend to helping law enforcement uh, responsibly or more carefully, more safely use such technology? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and definitely, I mean, one can always say that we are just coming out with theoretical stuff, and we don't have responsibility, and that probably again would be a cop out. So we thought long and hard about this, and one of the differences that we have in our approach is, or rather, the way we approach this is we have no intention of monetizing this. We are not building this as a product to monetize and just essentially help police departments, no matter whether they have the right intention or not. So it's not for that. We have no intention of monetizing this. We're not thinking about this. Really, neither me nor my co-authors have interest in that or time for that. So there is that. We are not. It is not a product. It's not a product. It's a study. It has stuff that you can use to predict crime, maybe. And that's one of the reasons why the code is not in the public domain. While it is viewable, it is usable by anyone, but we can actually stop people from using it if you wanted to. So there's that. So that's where we can do. But then this is an open paper, right? What happens if someone reads it and comes up with their own implementation of the code, of the algorithm, and then just runs it without telling us? And how would we ever know? So there's always that problem with enforcing software copyrights and stuff like that. But the hope is here that this would be used. I hope it is going to be useful. That's one, and the second hope is that it will be used in a manner that we envision. That it will be used to help design better policy, rather than just trying to predict where there'll be a crime and just send everyone there. That isn't going to be not the intended use of this, and that will probably not work out very well as well, because that will change the system itself, and then you have to keep, yeah, there are lots of issues with that. So, bottom line is, we hope that, or rather, we have thought about this. We are not planning to offer this as a product to law enforcement. The idea is to kind of interact with policymakers to optimize policy, kind of see what the outcome of different policies would be in a quantitative way, rather than going by gut feeling. So that's really the intended use of this is.
That's fantastic. I love to hear that, because I often have that concern. And, when these systems were first introduced, I think a little while ago, some police agencies really got on board, and they actually saw increases in arrests and other things. But were they actually addressing the core of what drove the crime, or were they just showing up and then finding an excuse to arrest people just because of human psychology that kind of fell apart? So I'm really
Right.
happy that your work is more study focused rather than commercial based, because I think this problem really warranted more study before it was ever implemented. So thank you for sharing your work here today.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, you've been
Maybe
staying.
maybe we should try to wrap this up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask. You've been staying here for an hour and 20 minutes, so I wanted to give you basically a way out. It's a
Yeah.
good way.
So maybe if there's one more question, I can take one more question. I have to go. I have to. Yeah. I think I can still hear my daughter, and she should be in bed by now. So
Yeah,
I see. Oh, sorry. I'm just noticing in the chat that there is somebody is asking about Palantir, which has been on my mind the entire time, and the bias inherent in Palantir, even so much so that some companies are not using that any longer. That was a question from Blackheart, is asking if we can address that.
uh, I am not super familiar with. I'm like peripherally aware of this, but what is it that Palantir does? Like, what is the selling point of that? Is it
Facial
like
rec.
big data analytics, or do they actually do something in crime as well?
Yeah, with crime, facial recognition technology, and then the data that shows that Black people and people of color are more likely to be mistaken for
Yeah,
another
yeah.
person
So
because,
right,
yeah,
right, right. Yeah. Now I remember. So see, people, we are legitimately concerned about this kind of AI technologies, machine learning technologies that are coming online. Right now, it is going to happen. whether you like it or not. I mean, you can move out, I don't know, to Wyoming, I guess, and just live with in a ranch, by a ranch somewhere where no one ever goes, and maybe you can avoid that there. But unless you do that, um, this is going to happen. All these technologies are going to come online. Things are exponentially becoming cheaper, exponentially becoming more powerful. The things that we can do on a tiny chip is kind of blows my mind when I just look at it for after a few years. It blows my mind. Oh, we can do that now. So it's going to happen. So what is it that we should do? First, of course, as Victoria was saying, we have to make sure that policies are in place which prevent abrogation of individual rights. I'm a big believer in that, um, and we should all be. This is America, but other than that, it's like it's going to happen. It's this kind of companies like people will have access. Corporate people will have access to technologies. Uh, Agencies and the government will have the capability to surveil the populace more than ever at like ways that we have never, perhaps not even conceiving right now. So what do we do about it? Is there anything we can do? So one approach would be to try to find technologies or try to create technologies that democratize the AI, right? Um, I won't say that this approach that we're talking about here does like completely does that, but it does that to some extent because it's an open code anyone can use. The data is in the public domain. So if you have access to a moderately powerful computing setup and not something like a university cluster or a Department of Energy cluster, you don't need that. You probably need a couple of laptops to actually run this. Take a long time, but you can still do it. So you can actually run the models. You can actually verify if there is bias. You can use this to audit the state. So that's something that we should be aware of. We should create technology that is not just usable by the corporations and the government, the state, that is, but can be actually used by anyone who wants to use it and use it as a means to audit um, the state. Um, so that's one kind of a more general approach to it. And other than that, the kind of the biases that show up in this kind of AI, many kind of off-the-shelf AI tools, it happens. One of the reasons it happen is because people are picking and choosing the features that of the data that is pointed out to be important during training. The algorithm itself is not biased. It is not a human thing. It has no biases. The bias comes in because someone is training the algorithm and they either have implicit biases or they think these are unbiased characteristics and they are not. Sometimes even they might creep in ways that is almost impossible for the person, the data scientist who is keying in those features can imagine. So again, one good way of avoiding that would be to not start with a chosen fixed set of features. So that's what this approach does. But understandably, that will be harder to do in some applications, like when you're trying to do image processing and stuff. Yeah, but that is the way I would try. I would at least urge people in machine learning, the researchers and data scientists, think about like implementations in on those lines.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. We really appreciate you coming here and for your work. Thank you for doing this basically, and it's been a pleasure having you here. And thank you everyone for asking great questions. And yeah, I hope you have a lot of funding in the future and maybe help policymakers do data-driven decisions.
Yeah, thank you for inviting
I-
me. It was great. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. And yeah, I love hearing from people. So yeah, and
yeah,
thank you for inviting me.
yeah, and if you want to ever come back with another project, some updates, please feel always free to come back. And thank you so much again.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for coming. Follow the club if you like discussions like these and rooms like these. Tomorrow we will have Dr. Whitehead where he uses new biosensors made out of plant hormone receptors, which will be really interesting tools for health and medicine. So and also other applications. So thank you, Ishanu, again. I'm also going to bring my daughter to bed. I wish you all the best for that one. And have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Oh my gosh.
I'll close the room in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone.